welcome to another Alia Graphic Creator Chat. I'm James, and today I'm joined by Rachel Ang.
Hi, James.
Hi. Now, to get started, as a national group based across the land we call Australia, Alia Graphic would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I'd specifically like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the custodians of the land where both Rachel and I are based and are recording from today. And to pay respect to their elders, past and present, and to extend that respect to all First Nations peoples. Um, Now, Rachel Ang is an artist, writer, and comics creator based in Melbourne. They've been published in a wide variety of publications, including Meanjin, Koosh, and The New Yorker. Their first book, Swimsuit, was published by Glom Press and was awarded a Silver Ledger in 2019. Her new book, I Ate the Whole World to Find You, is available now. Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Now, before we get into it, can you
Mm,
give us a brief synopsis of the book? What are people getting when they open it up?
yeah, sure. Oh, I should have made sure that I had a copy here to hold up. It's a collection of short stories that I guess they all they all feature the same central character whose name is Jenny, but they kind of take different angles or genres or cues of her life, I guess, and show different moments or kind of periods of time. So some of the stories are more kind of scary, some are kind of more introspective, but I think what ties them together is an interest in similar themes, which are to do with growing up, the inner child, labor, how we use work to understand our lives, sexuality and desire and relationships. So each story kind of takes a different lens or a different angle on those themes.
That's a really interesting basis for this book. Now, before we get into the book particularly, though, how
Hmm.
did you first get interested in comics?
Yeah, I think that when I was a child, like quite small, I was very into comics like Snoopy, Garfield, Tintin, Asterix, everything that you could get from the local library or the school library, I would read. Um, Even though I think the impression I got from my parents was that it wasn't like real reading, like it wasn't considered kind of serious in the same way that like reading chapter books would be. And then but then I think as I grew older, and maybe because at that time they did there was less of an offering in the middle grade young adult comics graphic novel space. I fell away from comics and I didn't read them that much until when I was in my early 20s. I started working in public libraries again, and as a library officer. And that's when I got exposed to a lot of artists that I found really inspiring. One of the books that I read that really moved me was Skim by Gillian and Mariko Tamaki. And I think the drawing style and the kind of the scope of the story, the interests of the characters really spoke to me, as a young person. And I was like, oh, okay, like if comics could do this, then that's a medium that I'm interested in exploring.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, you said we always ask what the
Mm,
creators have had to do with libraries.
mm.
Clearly, working as a library officer, that's a particularly apt question in your case. How did that come about, and why did
Mm.
you move away from working in libraries? And
Yes.
what was it that drew you to working in libraries, and why aren't you still there?
Yeah, great question. Well, when I was about 15, I got a job as a shelver in the local library. So that was at Monash Public. Because I grew up in around that area. And then I think when I graduated high school, they asked me if I wanted to, yeah, work the circulation desk and have more responsibilities. And I did. And it was a perfect job while I was in, university age. And I got to, yeah, it was actually a really, I think back at on that time in my life very nostalgically because I got to go to all the different branches of the library and I got to engage with the community in a way that I think you rarely do in life because it's one of those public spaces where people don't need to spend any money. It's purely around like knowledge or enjoyment or, giving people a safe space to hang out. So that was really beautiful. The reason I didn't stay in libraries was that when I was at university, I studied art and then architecture. So I have a master's degree in architecture, and that's what I've been working in for the last maybe decade. But I don't know, like I'm taking some time off for mat leave at the moment, and I'm thinking, why shouldn't I go back and study like information services? Like librarianship is where it's at. Yeah, I was just thinking about how my relationship to libraries has changed now that I have a child because my local library is now the Nam Nagu, which is adjacent to the Queen Victoria Market, and they have a really beautiful children's library next to the family services area. So I've been going there a lot more and thinking a lot more about, media and books for children and the role of story time and rhyme time and this sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's I Nam Nagu is a really, really beautiful space.
Yeah.
Yeah, Melbourne City Council has put a lot of work into making that library as effective as it can be for a whole range of things. But yeah, um, yeah, thank you for that. That's a really interesting perspective. Now, getting more towards this particular book, what was the inspiration for it? What drove you to write Jenny's story?
Mm. Um, well, the way I originally pitched this book to my publisher was I've got some of these short stories that I've written previously that are quite disparate, and I would like to connect them somehow and look at what the threads are that bind them together, draw them closer together, and see if they can become something different or something more kind of complex. So, yeah, I think maybe we discussed off air about how some of these stories existed before or had been published before, but I reinterpreted them and recontextualized them in with this idea that it's the same character who's going through her life that we meet at different phases of her life. And I guess a lot of the inspiration for my stories comes from, and this sounds quite cliched, but my own life.
That's fine. It's a valid place as any to draw inspiration from. So the ones that published previously that you were talking about, that's the swimsuit and
Mm.
the passenger were the
Yeah.
ones previously published. So and you said that you hadn't at the time seen them as part of a larger work; they were independent.
Um, yeah, that's right. I think I saw them as like living in different universes, maybe, especially because the passenger was and remains quite a what's the word like it lives in quite a surreal world, whereas swimsuit is quite quotidian, I think, like it's a recognizable environment, and the characters that we meet are very, it's a situationship, or it's like they're people that you probably know. Yeah.
Mhm. So, what was it that made you then go, I want to make these part of that same universe. I want to make it this
Mm,
one character's story that we're seeing parts of the same person's life from these stories.
yeah. I think I'm quite interested in how like the kind of more dream or surreal world and our world can be quite connected. Like the curtain between them is very thin or something. So that's something I try to reference in the book through motifs of like the water or curtains or reflections, or kind of shadows, different kind of layers of gray to indicate like there's something beyond our world, and it maybe it's the past trauma or memories or the future, and they're all kind of influencing each other in different ways.
And you, when I was looking into it, so the Passenger, when it was published on
Mm.
its own, it was titled Toot, I think. Was that?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Um, and you changed that for the inclusion in this book.
Mm,
Um, what other changes did you need to make to these two sections to make
mm,
them work for inclusion, and why?
yeah. Um, I think that as I was redrawing them or thinking about this character in the context of her childhood and then in terms of her future, the way I drew her and the kind of the tone and everything just kind of shifted without me consciously trying to shift it, if that makes sense. Because it's only in hindsight. I was looking at Swimsuit, um, the original that Glom Press published, and then I was looking at the newer version that's in this book, and it's kind of beat for beat the same, but the feeling is really different, and I'm not totally sure why. It could be that yeah, I don't know. I think like for example, changing the title of to the passenger, maybe my the emphasis is no longer on the train or the events, but on the passenger, on the main character. And like, did she make all of this happen? What's her kind of um is she actually the author of this tragedy? Do you know what I mean? And also I think I thought that Toot Toot was maybe a bit silly or something. Like maybe I didn't think the story would be published. So um so yeah, I think as well, what was I going to say? Yeah, changing things. Also, if you look back at the drawing style that I used to have, it's still me, but it's just kind of, I think starting to draw digitally, start just growing as an artist. It's just kind of shifted in a way that I don't know how to describe.
Yeah. Um, so bringing these two into the new work, was that the main reason behind presenting it as this series of vignettes, these moments, or was there more to it that made you go with this less conventional structure of these somewhat unconnected moments that happen
Hmm,
to be happening to the same person almost? Yeah.
yeah. Um, I'm not sure. Yeah, so I did have those stories, but I think that the short story is like a format that I really love and have a lot of respect for, especially um, in graphic narratives. But I went through a phase during lockdown of reading Russian short stories. Did you read this George Saunders book, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, where he just takes apart short stories and I think, at a different point in my life, I wouldn't have been like, oh my God, yes, tell me more about Tolstoy or something. But it really hit me at the right time where I was like, oh yeah, the short story, because it has to be so brief, it actually can contain like the whole world. Do you know what I mean? And then if you have a bunch of them adjacent to each other and they're all talking to each other, I think that it becomes just like a very, yeah, the short story collection can be very potent, right? And I was thinking about like adjacencies, but also kind of diagonal connections. So, yeah, that the stories are like these connected rooms, but from one you can look into the other and see, like, oh, she's acting like this because it's the ripple effect of something that happened when she was a child or something.
Yeah. So what was that again that you said, the George Saunders one?
It's called a swim in a pond in the rain. Yeah,
Swim in the Pond in the Rain. I will have to look into that. I'm not across that one. So thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, these vignettes, these moments that you focus on, they're often not what you'd expect from
Mm.
those big moments that you'd find in most narratives. Instead, you focus on those in between moments and times of missed connections and difficult communication. What is it about those moments that makes you interested in exploring them?
Yeah, I think that I'm very interested in, as you say, like not the big moments, but the interstitial moments when you might be more vulnerable or you might not think about the significance of the moment, but then when you look back on life, you're like, oh, that's when the whole axis of my life shifted. Or I think if you think about it on a character level, especially with a visual medium like comics, when you get those in between moments and you see the micro expressions on people's faces and you get to really be like, oh, okay, that's what you really think or feel. The face that you might not want to show other people, for example. Um, and I think, I don't know, I was thinking about this like, you might think that your wedding day or the birth of your child or something like that is like the most critical moment of your life, right? But actually, life is made up of all the kind of, right, taking out the trash and waking up at 3 a.m. and all these kind of like things that don't seem important, but actually that's the texture of the whole thing of life.
Yeah. So that's these are those moments that build up to what you think of as those critical moments. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess so. Like the build up or what comes after, or yeah.
Mm, yeah. Um, so playing with the that communication and how that all works. Um, Something that runs very strongly through this work. Um, but then some of the most powerful moments of the book, you've just let the words disappear entirely.
Mm,
Some of the ones I'm thinking of in Hunger, there's a moment where Jenny feels truly appreciated, and you've taken, I think it's almost a spread to show us these birds nesting and flowers blooming on this nearby tree, and then and that just lets that moment sit with the reader and with Jenny in the story, and
mm,
in Swimsuit. As the harassment they witness becomes more serious, there's no words, and this silence almost is broken suddenly by an announcement over the loudspeakers, and then it returns to silence as they work up the will to continue following this experience that they've just had. Um, it feels like this using words and images, you're also actively using a lack of words throughout.
yeah.
Now, how do you find the balance for all of that for the story?
Yeah, I think that I am really interested in leaving space for the reader to be an active reader, right? To kind of try to interpret what's happening because that, ambiguity of meaning or not being sure what you've seen or kind of not knowing someone's intentions, that's one of the key kind of threads through all of the stories as well. So if the reader becomes kind of complicit in that or needs to take part in the interpretation, I think that it makes it a more um I don't know, I hope that it pulls the reader in as well. I think the balance is something that I found quite difficult sometimes to achieve though. Like the last story in particular, Purity, I'm very interested in the limits of language and how we pass language on and like the kind of idiolects that we have for ourselves or with one other person. And I tried to cut out all the words, for example, and then it was too much, right? And then I had too many words, right? And it was kind of like the narrator should shut up a bit and let the reader in. And I think it's through, my editor and also my partner who makes comics as well. They both gave me a lot of input into like what's working, what's not working, that sort of thing.
So you're actively so this is something you hear on a lot of a lot of authors being interviewed and discussion blogs and stuff like that. That idea of how much an author's intent should come through and how much a reader
Mm.
should bring their own stuff. That's you sounds like you're coming down very hard on the author should bring a lot to the story as well.
Yeah, hang on. I'm just going to my battery's about to die, so I'm
Oh,
just
okay.
going to plug myself in.
Yep.
Um, what? Yeah, look, I think people who write fiction, like they're always talking about show, don't tell, right? But I think there's a kind of it really depends on the story, right? But yeah, I'm probably more on the side of um the reader is really smart, I think. And you notice this even when reading to children. I think that the entire act of reading is kind of like you and I might read a text but come to totally different conclusions, right? So I'm of the opinion that that's the kind of the joy of reading, really. The kind of the gap between like intention and then interpretation or image and text, where you can sort of like wonder about things. Yeah, that's very important to me. So I don't want to close it up totally. Do you know what I mean? Let people wonder what I meant.
Yeah, that was it Scott McCloud, the actions in the gutter sort of thing.
A
The-
100%. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Um, so you're talking about purity just before as well,
Mm.
and that expectations about communication, and the way that that's presented in the comics medium. So you said you were trying to get rid of the words, you brought them back and tried to find that balance. You also got in both in the passenger and in purity. Large portions of panels are often taken up with these big empty speech bubbles. Um,
Yeah.
and in Purity, one of the characters, you've intentionally made their language harder to pass by putting spaces in, not between words, but random points
Mm.
within words. Um,
Mm.
is that how are you making sure that you're not breaking breaking the reader's immersion? Because these are quite, you know, it can break you out of the story quite easily to do this. Um, but instead are highlighting Jenny's struggles
Yeah,
through
yeah.
this. Yeah.
Um, I guess, well, I hope that it doesn't break them out of it to use these unconventional uses of the speech bubble. But I think that because, it's something that comics can do really well, that the speech bubble is like this physical presence on the page, right? So it allows you to have the physical presence of what isn't said or what cannot be expressed. But it can also, it can tangle things up. It can sort of suffocate someone. It can take up space in the room. And I guess I just hope that by looking at it as a visual thing, not necessarily reading what's in the bubble, that the reader um, can stay in the story and kind of just feel the emotional valence of what the character's expressions are trying to tell them.
Was it a nervous like was it a nervous thing to go down that path and have that potential misunderstanding, I guess, from readers about how that what you were trying to achieve there?
Yeah, definitely at first it was hard to let go. And I think as you need to, for me anyway, because I don't, this sort of book will never be a big commercial success. It's sort of like trying to make exactly what I want, even if that might be enigmatic or ambiguous, and hope that that connects with some readers. Um, because I think that there's space in the comics medium for all kinds of stories, right? So some are more like, uh, some might be extremely explicit, extremely kind of for a mainstream audience. Some are more like art comics, which are extremely hard to pass and kind of like it's almost like looking at abstract expressionism. And I was kind of trying to live in that space a bit. So I hope that they do work as stories, but I hope that there's also a gesturing towards like I have influences that are more kind of more ambiguous or like um yeah, more on the art comic side of things. But I was nervous because no one wants to be misunderstood. And I think if you're an artist especially, it's like if you ever try playing Pictionary with other artists, it quickly comes to blows and stuff because you're like, why can't you understand what I'm trying to draw here? Yeah.
It was, yeah, not what I would expect artists to come to blows over, but no, it makes sense. Um, so this is your second book published in physical form.
Mm,
Um, but you've got many more works available digitally on your website,
mm,
drawby4.com, is it,
mm.
or .com.au? You don't remember?
Just.com.
.com, yeah. What distinction do you make between your works for print and for digital publication?
Not much. I think that there's some stuff that I've made that was well, it depends because when you're making things through a digital medium, you're thinking about the action of kind of scrolling, like infinite scroll. So you want it to just like flow really well. When you're thinking about the book, every time the reader turns the page and reveals something new, that's kind of like a moment, right? Or like it's like they're opening the door to the next part of the story. So, um, and they also engage with, the spread differently. The feeling of the book and everything is important as well. So I think it's yeah, you can do different things for different medium, I guess. I think that I always aspired more to print media. But I really admire, like I've read some incredible graphic work online where it really plays with, the digital space. And yeah, that's really exciting to me as well.
And going between them, have you like make something for digital, put it in print, or make something for print and then go, actually that'll work really well in digital? How much do you find that happens?
Um, I have tried it before. So like something that I drew for digital, I tried to make it into a zine and it didn't really work that well, but I'm still not really sure why. It could just be like when you have the intention for something to be printed, you approach it in a different way. But yeah, I think because it's a different experience of creating and also of reading, it's just, yeah, maybe it doesn't transfer that well.
Yeah, fair enough. Now on your website, one of the ones that I was uh, really taken by was the Mapping Melbourne 2019 festival. Now you were involved with the organising of that, and part of
No,
what you know?
no,
No?
I just created the visual
Oh,
identity,
okay.
graphic identity, yeah.
Fair enough. But yeah, so it was you made it a cast of characters to represent the festival throughout the promotional material and all of that. Um, what was this like to do, and what were the similarities and differences between this and the comics work that you do?
Yeah. It was really fun. There were, I mean, I don't do a lot of freelance work like for, commercial or other applications. I prefer to work in a narrative space, but this was really good, I think, because I was given a lot of free reign. And I think the challenge of, trying to create something that indicates like there's a whole world or universe or story there when someone only gets to see one character or one snippet is like very challenging and exciting, I think.
Do you feel that you were successful, and how did you bring that out?
Um, do I think it was successful? Yes, look, I can barely remember what it was like, but I remember feeling really chuffed at seeing my little characters around town, like on the posters, on the ticketing, on the tote bags. And um, it's cool to see something that you make have another life like that, which is like quite different to something that, lives in a book or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I think part of what when I was looking at it, what drew me to it was like, oh, I remember seeing those around on
Yeah,
various things at the
cool.
time. So yeah, it certainly stuck out.
Cool.
Um, Similarities and the differences between this and the comics. How did you find that
Hmm. It is really different because you think about the audience differently. When I'm thinking about making comics, I think about like talking to the reader in a really intimate one-to-one way. But when you're thinking about making something like this, which is for the audience of a festival or like a stranger on a tram or something, it's a bit different, right? You want to create something that is will kind of have that hook or purchase for them. And as well, I think, I felt really empowered by the client to do something that was handmade, that was colorful and had more of a patchwork feel. So, yeah, hopefully it was engaging in the way that I wanted.
yeah, that's cool. Now we're coming to the end of the chat. But before we finish up, we always ask the people who come on, what are three comics or graphic novels that you've enjoyed recently and that you'd encourage others to check out?
Mm, hang on a sec. I'm just gonna grab them so I can hold them up for the.
Cool. Yeah.
All right. Here's your return. Um, Okay, so the first one I'd like to recommend to our readers is this one, True and Beautiful. It's a short comic by Bailey Sharp, who's a Melbourne-based author, and they're also one of the Glom Press people who I think you've spoken to previously on this podcast. So this came out recently. It's a very beautifully drawn and printed short story, in which someone just goes to a cafe and waits to meet their cousin, but they spend the whole time waiting, thinking about what is the relationship between cousins, right? Because it's not like a sibling, and it's not like a parent, and it's not like a lover. But is there something um, diagonal, or is there something kind of like mysterious there? Some people marry their cousins, you know, some people don't have any cousins. So it's just it's a very kind of it goes to so many different places around um, you know, social interactions and unspoken kind of urges and evolution. I just found it to be like, yeah, very charming and quirky and a great read. So you can get that from Glom Press. Yeah. Um, and then the second book that I read recently was Holy Lacrimony by Michael DeForge. So that's out this year through Drawn and Quarterly. And it's the story of a an Earth-based musician who is the saddest person in the world. And they get abducted by aliens who wish to study their sadness. So, or at least their performance of being sad. So, um, Michael DeForge has this very, I think, like deceptively simple but enigmatic style of drawing, which I find very inspiring. Earlier I mentioned that a lot of my influences are more on the art comics kind of side of things where things are less explained. And I think there's just um, the way the way that DeForge draws bodies and faces is just so inventive and like kind of disgusting and um, deconstructed. I find it, yeah, just very inspiring. Um, and then the last book that I'm going to recommend is Stone Fruit by Lee Lai. So this came out a few years ago. It was shortlisted for the Stella Prize. So that's an Australian-based literary award for women and non-binary authors. And Lee Lai has a new book coming out this year through Drawn and Quarterly. So I just wanted to revisit their last graphic novel to remind myself of how great they are, pretty much. So Stone Fruit is the story of a queer couple, and it explores a lot of ideas that I find very potent or perennially interesting myself to do with care, community, how do we love each other, what like family, especially if you are queer or have a non-conventional family, because we got to invent it for ourselves and find new ways of relating to each other and how to care for each other. And yeah, they have a very beautiful drawing style as well, I think, of this like gouache and ink on paper that is really, yeah, it's a joy to read. So hopefully that's in people's local libraries as well. Yeah, so those are my recs.
Yeah, really great Rex. I have, in fact, I was on the Cars judging panel for Stone Fruit. So yeah,
Ah,
very familiar with that one. Haven't read the other two. Had heard about the that Bailey had the new one coming,
mm.
and have been looking forward to that. But yeah, hadn't read that. Haven't read the other one either. So we're I always there's the only thing better than having them. I know all these ones and I'm reading the same ones as the artists. Great.
Yeah,
Is oh, I've got all these new recommendations.
yeah, yeah, 100%.
um, so yeah, but that's right, and it speaks to the range of what comics can cover, like that from waiting in a cafe to your cousin to being abducted by aliens to study sadness. It's
Yeah,
such a broad thing.
yeah,
Very very different to what a lot of people want to reduce comics down to. It's
exactly.
you know,
Yeah. They
wearing
can
your
do
underpants on the
anything.
outside and punching bad guys. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, if people want to do that, that's cool too.
yeah. Oh, it's all part of the of what can be comics or what comics can be.
Mm.
Yeah, which is fantastic. Now, finally, um, now that you've finished and you've got I Ate the Whole World to Find You published, what's
Mm.
next?
Well, so I've started thinking and working on my next work, which will be a graphic novel, about, well, it's kind of ostensibly about learning to drive, right? Later in life. So I'm 37 years old and I can't drive a car, which I think is very unusual, at least, like in the context of Australia, or like most people would find it quite strange. And so it's about this person who's learning to drive, but then as you can imagine, it's also about learning how to do a bunch of other things as well. So it's also about her family and her parents who are becoming aged and enfeebled and that sort of thing.
Hmm, sounds really interesting. Yeah, definitely. I don't drive either, so definitely one that I'm interested in reading from that perspective, even. So yeah. Um, so thank you for joining us today, Rachel. Now, if people are interested in picking up a copy of I
No,
Ate the
thank you
Whole
for
World,
having me, James.
uh, if people are interested in picking up a copy of I Ate the Whole World to Find You, where should they go to get it?
Well, they can get it directly from Scribe, which is my Australian publisher, scribepublications.com.au, I think, or they can get it directly from Drawn and Quarterly, who's my publisher in the rest of the world, or just hopefully their local independent bookstore should have it. But also, I've noticed a lot of local libraries have been putting it on the shelves, which is really gratifying to me.
Yeah, yeah, it's great that's been seeing that go up in libraries. It's fantastic. Um, and if they want to keep up,
Amazing.
if people want to keep up with your work more generally, how can they do that?
Yes, well, they can follow me on Instagram. My handle is at RTWA. That's just my initials. Or yeah, I don't really have any other platforms. So yeah, that's the best way to find me until I move on to whatever the new thing is.
Yeah. Or your website, drawby4.com.
Yes, correct.
Oh, well, thank you. And if you want to keep up to date with Alia Graphic, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and find out more, including the specific handles for those on our website, graphic.alia.org.au. Um, and we have lots more creator chats in our podcast, many of which are also available as videos on our YouTube channel. And each month we release a comics roundup, both through our blog and through this podcast. So definitely keep your eye on those.
Amazing.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. And until next time, keep reading comics.
Thanks, James.